Alright, in the last video we talked about, or we ended by talking about robber barons, or captains of industry. It really depended who you were talking about when you decided what to call these guys. But we're going to start by looking at some of these different captains of industry. The first one we're going to look at is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he was a railroad consolidator. Essentially what this means is he would buy up these smaller railroads that were owned by different people, and he combined them into this huge national system. And at his height, he actually owned around 40% of the nation's railroads. So very wealthy man, and there, of course, are pros and cons to what he did. As far as positive effects, he's kind of standardizing the railroad system. You saw this take place a little bit during the Civil War, but Cornelius Vanderbilt really extended it. But you had different railroads with different grades, meaning that like a railroad grade is the space between the rails. Well, you had some railroads that might be, might have a 6-foot grade, and then you would have other railroads that might have an 8-foot grade. And now that so much of the country's railroads are being bought up by this one man, he is starting to standardize it. We have one set grade, so you don't have to have one certain kind of train on one rail line and then another kind of train on another. As far as the negative side of what he did, he's in some areas killing competition. So the only railroads that you really have to choose from to ship your products were owned by the same person. So there's no competition, and he can really set his prices at whatever he wants them to be set at. Before we move on, let's take a quick look at this, the difference between vertical and horizontal integration. So let's start on the left with vertical integration. So what vertical integration means is you own each level of production. So in this case, this is a meat industry. If you use vertical integration to save money in the meat industry, that means that you own herds of cattle. You have constructed your own slaughterhouses. You have constructed your own refrigerated railroad cars, and so on and so forth. And what this is doing is, since you own each level of production, then you don't have to pay others to do this for you. Like, you don't have to buy cattle from one person and pay someone else to slaughter the cattle and pay someone else to ship the beef, just so on and so forth. Now you can do all this without paying anyone because you own it. On the right, let's look at horizontal integration. All this means is you are buying up other businesses, smaller businesses that do the same thing that you're doing, and you're combining those small businesses into a single large business. So I think this is a pretty good illustration that really helps to really press the point on what vertical integration and what horizontal integration are. Now, as far as vertical integration goes, the man who is probably best remembered for using it is this man, Andrew Carnegie. And he was a steel magnate. He started a corporation that was named after himself, Carnegie Steel. And like I said, he used vertical integration to lower cost. He owned iron ore mines. So he mined his own ore. He owned steamboats, so he could transport the ore to factories and so on and so forth. So he did not have to pay anyone else in the course of digging the ore out of the ground all the way to the finished product being sold. Vanderbilt was also known for his philanthropy, and all philanthropy means is He believed in donating money to charities. He believed in essentially helping the poor. This is in part because Carnegie himself grew up poor. He was a Scottish immigrant who arrived in the United States when he was 12, and he worked his way up to at one point, the richest person in the world. Now, he primarily focused on education. He donated money to build universities. He donated money to construct libraries. And the reason for that is education allows you to work your way up the same way that he did, but you have to take advantage of it. I know we have all tried to place a textbook in front of ourselves and we have hoped that it would read itself, but it has never worked. So, in this regard, he was a big fan of education because it allows you to work your way up, but at the same time, it's you have to put in the work. You cannot just nothing's handed to you in this case. The next captain of industry I want to look at is John D. Rockefeller, and he went into the oil industry. He started a corporation which he called Standard Oil, and he used horizontal integration. So basically, he would buy out other oil refineries, and he slowly combined them into a single large corporation. And eventually, he owned over 90% of all refineries in the United States. And so his corporation is remembered as the first monopoly in American history. And to this day, unless I'm mistaken, he is the richest person of all time. By today's standards, he would be worth around $480 billion. This is a political cartoon about Rockefeller. He is shown as being an octopus. And, think about this in terms of horizontal integration. You're constantly reaching out and grabbing all the other industries or all the other refineries. Okay, the last person I want to look at is J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was a banker and a financer, and he would buy stock in the companies that he financed. So he would give out loans, he would help companies get started, but in return, that company had to place him or one of his friends on the board of directors. So this gave him quite a bit of influence in all these different big companies that he helped to start. And this gave him a lot of power. So as far as the four men that we've just talked about, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan was actually the least rich, but he was probably the most powerful because he had so much influence over these different companies.